Until recently in the Western world, the term gender has been thought of as binary, being only guys or girls. In general, gender is usually connoted as what genitalia one was born with, and the idea of gender identity is often ridiculed, with the stigma surrounding those who consider themselves outside normal gender identities as ridiculous. To look more closely at this idea, we must first understand what makes up gender, and whether or not the idea of genitalia being a deciding factor is reasonable. People have assumed that sex chromosomes are the determining factor for a person's gender, being XX for females and XY for males. While in the majority of people this is the case, there are such things as mutations. Mutations are random changes in the genetic code of a person that brings diversity to a population. In nature, if the gene is harmful, then the gene will be discarded from the gene pool. And likewise, if it is helpful, then the gene will be passed on to future offspring and spread throughout the gene pool. Mutations such as these are what cause interesting things to occur, such as gender ambiguity. For example, some females can be born with an XY chromosome due to mutation, and vice versa for men. The World Health Organization would go on to say how gender is a range of hormone balances, chromosome complements, and phenotypic variations. It's not simply the chromosomes one is born with. Gender is consequently an incredibly complicated concept as a result. Mutations can create several things to occur. For one, it could create people who do not have any genitals. How would one categorize this person? To simply call them as male or female is simply ignorant and, quite frankly, not accurate. Similarly, when hormone production becomes abnormal, the idea of gender becomes much more muddled. You may feel a woman, but you were physically born as a man, or vice versa. Some people may be born with genitals, but feel no sexual attraction to the other gender. It's these types of situations, along with many more, which is what led to the creation of multiple different types of genders we see now. Gender isn't just binary, but rather a spectrum for those who face mutations that affect the way their body works or functions. So now that we know the science behind all of it, what does this mean to society? It's really an interesting question, because when someone identifies as someone who isn't a man or woman, it questions the idea of gender as a whole. Is gender really something genetic, or rather a social construct created by people to explain the differences in genitalia? It's these questions that have created the news laws surrounding the LGBTQ community, as well as women empowerment. So what does this mean for gender? Is it really a social construct? There are some things that are undeniable when comparing men and women. The reason that the two genders exist, of course, is to reproduce. Some other differences that may have led to the gender roles we see in society is that, in general, men are physically stronger than women. As A.E. Miller would put it, women were around 52 to 65% as strong as men when he tested them. Some other differences include women having more body fat percentage, men having more hair, men having deeper voices, etc. In general, most of these features were used in nature to appeal to the opposite gender for reproductive purposes. So from nature's standpoint, the difference in gender was solely for reproduction. After all, in nature, the only purpose for our existence was to reproduce and survive, to ensure that our offspring survived. However, in the modern era, most notably in developed countries, most people have access to the bare essentials to survive, live, and reproduce in a relatively safe environment. It is because we have such a long and unprecedented amount of peace that we as a species have gotten as far as we have. Because of that, the idea of what gender means has to change. These include gender roles and what dictates gender. I believe we have to have a serious discussion about what gender truly means, because the gender roles filled in the past simply do not reflect the modern era we live in today. We live for more than just reproduction and survival now, and as a result, gender and gender roles should be adjusted to fit in the new paradigm we live in. This paradigm should also include people with hormonal imbalances / mutations that, in the past, would not have been as prevalent because of natural selection. Now, when referring to pronouns and gender identities, there are quite frankly a lot of them. The number varies, and quite frankly could be higher, but according to ABC News, there are around 58 gender options that have been made available to Facebook. Many of these terms are complicated and adhere to different aspects of a person. Some refer to the genetic aspect, such as having physical alterations to one body that may not fit either gender. Most of the other genders, in general, are about different aspects of the gender which they feel more closely attuned to. Some take aspects of male and female in both physical and mental characteristics, while some others are physically male but long to be female. It's quite interesting to see how we can further expand on our concept of gender by learning from the unique people of multiple genders. Now, in the beginning of the video, I did mention that the Western world only saw two genders. Why exactly did I say that? Well, that's because in the Eastern world, transgenderism and in general other genders other than male and female have already been recognized. For example, in Hinduism, it is widely accepted that there are three genders, being male, female, and a third gender known to Hinduism as Triti Prakriti. It's a very interesting ideology because it supports many of the ideals of gender fluidity. Since it is believed that we are reincarnated as either male or female in our past lives, that we can carry the subconscious tendencies of the other gender, meaning to some extent that everyone has a male or female inside of them. In this belief, gender is not purely based on genitalia, but rather one's psychology, a very progressive ideal in a time long ago. Now obviously it doesn't describe or do justice for every gender out there, but it was the understanding of a topic that was far ahead of its own time. Interestingly, some forms of Buddhism actually see Buddha as a transgender person, which makes sense since Buddhism was largely influenced on Hinduism. If you want to learn more about this topic, I did a video on it. Make sure to check it out. Gender is clearly a much more complicated idea than was originally thought of. Instead of being purely dictated by something as arbitrary as genitalia, it is a complicated question that inquires into the nature of humanity. It questions gender roles and their placement in society, as well as completely changes what it means to be woman or man. It is a fascinating topic that will hopefully expand the true meaning of what it is to be human. As Selim Kellerman would put it, gender identity is our internal response to a social construct that attempts to make connections between a person's biological makeup and their eventual role in society. I hope you've enjoyed. Thanks for watching.